At my graduation party, Dad said. You didn't deserve this success, your brother did. I raised my glass proudly and said, Cool, then he can pay your bills too. And then, I said it with a smile. Calm. Controlled. The kind of smile you offer someone who's finally made it clear they were never on your side to begin with. There was a stunned silence after I raised my glass, maybe 5-10 seconds, but it felt like time stretched out just long enough for me to see everyone's expressions shift. The laughter died. The clinking of forks against plates stopped. And my father, still holding a half-empty beer, blinked like he wasn't sure what he'd just heard. But I knew what I'd said. For the first time in my life, I meant every word. The party was supposed to be a celebration. My graduation from college. Not just any college either. I had worked my way through one of the top public universities in the state. I paid for most of it myself. Scholarships, side jobs, late-night tutoring sessions, early morning shifts at the campus cafe. It wasn't pretty, but I did it. I made it. And no one in my family had lifted a finger to help. But that didn't stop me from inviting them. I rented out the patio of a local restaurant with what little I had saved, bought trays of food, decorations, drinks. I even paid the musician, just a guy with a guitar and a voice that could make you feel something. I wanted that night to feel like something. Like a turning point. And maybe it was. Just not in the way I expected. Everyone showed up. My mom, silent but supportive in the way she always was. My aunt and uncle, who'd always kind of straddled the line between family and spectators. My little cousins, running around with balloons tied to their wrists. And of course, my dad. He showed up an hour late. Already half buzzed, wearing a wrinkled fishing shirt and a smugness I knew too well. My brother, Eric, didn't come. He rarely did. But somehow, he was still there, hovering in every sentence my father spoke. Especially the one that flipped the whole night upside down. You didn't deserve this success, my dad said, standing up to make some kind of speech, or maybe just to hear himself talk. Your brother did. The words weren't slurred. They weren't said with a laugh. They landed hard, with the weight of years behind them. And in that moment, I realized something. I had been waiting my whole life for this man to tell me he was proud of me. And he never would. So I raised my glass, like we were still celebrating, and said, Cool. Then he can pay your bills too. It wasn't loud. I didn't need it to be. People heard. People understood. And some of them smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. I set the glass down, looked at my father one last time, and I left. No explanations. No goodbyes. No turning back. I didn't go home right after the party. I didn't have it in me to sit in my quiet apartment and replay every second of what had just happened. Instead, I drove. No destination. No plan. Just streetlights and silence. Somewhere around midnight, I ended up at the lookout point on the edge of town, the place teenagers used to sneak off to, where the city looked smaller, manageable. I parked, killed the engine, and sat with the windows down. The cold didn't bother me. It kept me present. I kept thinking about that sentence. You didn't deserve this success. Your brother did. What success? The degree I clawed my way to over 5 exhausting years? The job I landed after a brutal round of interviews? The debt I managed to avoid by living on ramen and refusing to go out when everyone else did? What had Eric done to deserve it more? That question had hovered over my life for as long as I could remember. Growing up, it was always Eric who got the easy forgiveness, the second chances, the applause for showing up. He dropped out of community college after one semester, and my dad still called him the smart one. When I got my first job at 16 to help pay for my own school clothes, Eric was on his 3rd warning at GameStop and still got a pat on the back for working hard. But I never had hard proof of the difference in treatment, not until my junior year of college. I came home one weekend to find a bill on the kitchen counter. A tuition invoice. Eric's name on it. Paid in full. That was the first time I knew, beyond a gut feeling, that things were exactly as lopsided as I'd always feared. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to start a fight. I figured maybe they couldn't help with mine because money was tight. Maybe they were trying their best. Maybe they assumed I didn't need it. But standing on that patio hours earlier, hearing my father praise the son who wasn't even there, while dismissing everything I'd sacrificed, it shattered the last of those maybe-yes. That was when I started pulling the thread. Digging into old records. Remembering things I'd buried. Looking at who they chose to save, and who they expected to survive alone. It was never about money. It was never about success. It was about belief. My parents, my father especially, never believed in me. I stared out at the dark city and whispered, just to myself, "That's over now." I didn't mean the argument. I meant the pretending, the hoping, the effort. I was done reaching for a hand that was never going to reach back. The thing about growing up overlooked is that you learn how to disappear, quietly, respectfully, even when you're standing in the middle of your own life. That night at the lookout, though, something changed. For the first time, I didn't want to disappear. I wanted out. Not just out of the party. Not just away from my father's voice. I wanted out of them. My family. For a long time, I told myself that earning their approval was just a matter of time. That if I worked hard enough, got good enough grades, landed the right job, something would click into place. They'd see me. They'd finally see me. But they never did. And it wasn't like they were cruel in a cartoon villain way. That would have been easier to walk away from. It was more like being invisible unless they needed something. My dad needed help with taxes. I was the responsible one. My mom needed someone to fix her laptop. Of course I was. The tech guy. Eric wrecked his car again. I was expected to drive him to interviews for jobs he'd never take. They didn't hate me. That would have taken effort. They just didn't care. That realization simmered for a few days after the party. I didn't respond to the texts or voicemails. My aunt messaged me on Facebook, saying my dad wasn't himself. That night, that he didn't mean it. My mom left a voicemail saying, "Please don't let one moment ruin everything." But it wasn't one moment. It was every moment. The little comments over the years. The way they tell Eric he was finding himself when he failed, but tell me to grow up when I struggled. The time my dad called me, too intense, because I wanted to talk about career goals, and later that same night, he proudly announced that Eric had started a band in the garage. A band that never played a single show. The resentment I'd buried for so long started surfacing in flashes, memories I didn't even know were still alive. Like when I broke my arm in high school and still got lectured for missing practice, while Eric failed a whole semester and was given a trip to Florida to relax. Or when I got my acceptance letter to college, and all my dad said was, "Hope you're not expecting a handout." I wasn't. I never was. And still, I gave. My time. My money. My patience. My silence. But now, I had nothing left to give. No dramatic confrontation. No shouting match. No. "You'll regret this" monologue. I just stopped. Stopped calling. Stopped texting. Stopped hoping. They wanted a version of me that didn't exist. The quiet supporter, the stable sibling, the shadow in the corner clapping for everyone else. And I'd played that role so well for so long, I almost forgot I was allowed to leave the stage. The decision didn't come in some dramatic swell of music and clarity. It came on a Tuesday. Just a regular, gray Tuesday, 2 days after the party. I woke up, made coffee, sat at the tiny kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment, and stared at the framed photo of my college graduation, the only picture I'd asked the waiter to take before I left the restaurant. In the background, you can see people laughing, plates still full, a balloon caught mid-drift. But I wasn't looking at the party. I was looking at myself. I didn't look proud. Or even relieved. I looked tired. Like someone who had carried a weight for so long, he didn't know he could put it down. That's when I reached for my phone. Not to text. Not to call. But to block. First my dad. Then my mom. Then Eric. Then the family group chat that never included me in anything unless someone needed a ride, a loan, or help filling out paperwork. One by one, I silenced them. I didn't write a farewell message. I didn't post anything vague or cryptic online. I just deleted the noise. And then I packed. I'd been holding on to that apartment out of habit, close enough to home in case they needed me. Far enough to keep some boundaries. But it wasn't really mine. It was a waiting room, a middle ground between trying and giving up. Now I was done waiting. I sold most of my furniture on Facebook Marketplace, used the money to pay off the last of my student loans, and transferred the lease to a friend from work. Within 2 weeks I was gone. New city. New apartment. New number. No fanfare. The only thing I took with me, aside from the essentials, was the diploma. I had it framed, finally, and hung it on the wall above my desk. Not to show off, not for motivation, but as proof that I did it on my own. That it mattered. Even if no one else had said it. Even if my dad had stood in front of a room full of people and tried to erase me. I was still here. I was still standing. And for the first time, I was standing alone, not because I'd been pushed out, but because I had walked away on purpose. It's funny how loud the world used to feel before I cut them off. Not just the actual voices, the constant opinions, criticisms, passive-aggressive jabs, but the mental noise. That low hum of, should I call? Or, maybe if I explain it this time, they'll get it. Once that was gone, replaced by silence. I expected to feel lonely. But I didn't. I felt free. The first night in the new apartment, I sat on the floor, no couch yet, no bed frame, just a mattress and a box of takeout, and listened to the quiet. Not the kind of quiet that makes you reach for background noise. The kind that settles in your bones. The kind that makes you breathe slower. I didn't check my phone. Didn't scroll to see if anyone noticed I was gone. I knew what would be there anyway. Missed calls. Messages full of guilt disguised as love. Maybe a few. After all we've done for you. Texts, heavy with that old, familiar weight of obligation. But I had blocked all of it. Not because I wanted to punish them. Because I was done explaining myself to people who'd already decided what I was worth. And in that silence, I started to remember who I was before all of that. I remembered how much I used to love cooking, before every family dinner turned into a performance review. I made myself a real meal the second night. Nothing fancy, just pasta with roasted vegetables and garlic bread. But I ate it at a table I built myself. I remembered that I used to draw. I found my old sketchbooks while unpacking, tucked away in a box labeled miscellaneous. And I spent a few nights just filling pages again, no judgment, no pressure. I remembered that I liked my own company. That I didn't need to prove my value to someone to feel valuable. And slowly, new people started finding their way into my life. A neighbor named Nate, who invited me over for board game nights with his friends. A woman named Mira I met at a bookstore, who asked what I was reading and ended up staying for coffee. Coworkers who saw me as more than the reliable one. People who wanted to know my story, not rewrite it. They didn't know about the years I spent trying to earn love like it was a competition. They just liked me. That was new. And I wasn't about to explain my past to make them see how far I'd come. I had nothing to prove anymore. Just the quiet. And finally, a version of my life that felt like mine. It happened 3 months after the party. I'd just gotten in from work, bag slung over my shoulder, jacket half off, when someone knocked on the door. 3 firm taps. Not a neighbor knock. Not a delivery. I froze. No one ever knocked like that. When I opened the door, my mom was standing there. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just diminished. Like someone trying to look sure of themselves but not quite pulling it off. "I was in town," she said, as if that explained anything. "Thought I'd stop by." I didn't say anything. Just held the door. Not open. Not closed. Waiting. She glanced past me, eyes scanning the apartment like she was surprised I had a life without them. "Your father's been asking about you." I raised an eyebrow. "He's not doing well. He misses you." That was the moment. The test. The soft pitch of guilt lobbed right over the plate. But I didn't swing. I just said, "He had the whole party to say that." And then, gently, I closed the door. Not with anger. With clarity. A week after she showed up, I got a voicemail. It came from an unknown number. I almost didn't listen to it. But something about the timestamp caught my eye. 2:43 a.m. People don't call at that hour unless they're drunk, desperate, or both. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over play. Then curiosity won. It was my father. His voice was slow, like he'd been drinking, but not slurred. Measured. Too measured. "I don't know what your problem is," he started. Not "hi." Not "I miss you." Just that. "You always think you're better than the rest of us. Always had that look in your eye. Like the world owed you something for showing up. You got your degree, fine. Good for you. But don't pretend like you did it alone. You came from us. And you'll come back to us. Eventually." Click. That was it. No apology. No regret. Just another reminder that, in his mind, my independence was betrayal. That my success was arrogance. But this time, the recording didn't sting. It confirmed everything I already knew. I wasn't part of their story anymore. And for the first time, that felt like peace. After the voicemail, I didn't feel anger. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my quiet apartment, staring out the window at the city lights, and I felt done. Not defeated. Not sad. Just done. It's strange how final a single moment can feel. Not because anything explodes, but because nothing does. You hear a voice you used to twist yourself inside out to please, and it sounds small. Hollow. Unimportant. Like a stranger who once had power over you, but no longer does. That voicemail was the last time I heard my father's voice. I didn't block the number. I didn't return the call. I just let it sit there. Unanswered. Like so many questions I used to lose sleep over. And that silence, that choice not to react, was more healing than any fight could have been. From there, life didn't get perfect. But it got real. I found a job I actually liked. Nothing flashy, just something stable, something mine. I started freelancing on the side too, doing some design work, pouring creativity into projects that reminded me I was more than what they made me out to be. My apartment slowly filled with signs of a life I was proud of. Bookshelves with dog-eared pages. A thrifted dining table with mismatched chairs that somehow worked together. A framed photo of me, in cap and gown, smiling, not for anyone else, just because I'd made it. And I built relationships that weren't transactional. Nate, my neighbor, became a close friend, the kind who didn't flinch when I told him the whole story one night over beers. He just nodded, handed me another bottle, and said, "Some families make you. Some break you. Sounds like yours did both." Mira and I started seeing more of each other, slowly, intentionally. No games. Just two people who'd both been burned in different ways and still chose to show up for something good. And that was the most important part. I didn't build my new life to prove anything. I built it because I finally believed I deserved it. Not because of what I accomplished. Not because I paid my dues. But because everyone deserves to be seen. Chosen. Loved. without conditions. One day, I was hanging a new piece of art above my couch when my phone buzzed again. 37 missed calls. All from numbers I once memorized. All from a world that didn't know how to exist without my labor, my silence, or my money. I stared at the screen, then turned the ringer off, and went back to hanging the frame. It happened on a Sunday. The kind where the air's soft, and the light hits everything just right. I was walking back from the coffee shop with a fresh loaf of sourdough under my arm and 2 iced drinks in hand. One for me, one for Mira. She was waiting back at my place, flipping through a record collection we'd started together. I wasn't thinking about my family at all. Not until I turned the corner and saw a car I hadn't seen in nearly a year. My mother's. Parked. Unmoving. As if it had driven all this way on a last breath and didn't know what to do now that it had arrived. I stopped walking. Heart steady, mind clear. She was standing by the door of my building, eyes scanning windows like she wasn't sure which one was mine anymore. She didn't see me. Not yet. And I didn't move. I stood half a block away and watched her fidget with something in her hands. A note, maybe. A letter she thought might fix things. Maybe it said something like "We miss you," or "Your father didn't mean it," or "Can we talk?" But I didn't need to read it. Because I already knew how the story went. I didn't approach her. I didn't call her name. I didn't turn around and flee either. I simply walked past. Slowly. Calmly. She turned just as I crossed the street. Our eyes met for half a second. She opened her mouth. But I gave her nothing. Not a nod. Not a glance. Just silence. It wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. I had already forgiven her. Quietly, without ceremony. I just hadn't invited her back in. Because forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door to people who never learned how to knock. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, and there Mira was, barefoot, hair up, spinning an old record like something out of a movie. She smiled when she saw me. I handed her the drink and kissed her cheek like nothing had happened. Because nothing had, not really. Not anymore. Behind me, the past waited at the curb. But I was already home. The diploma hangs above my desk now. Simple black frame. No spotlights, no fanfare. Just there. Quiet proof of the life I built when no one clapped. Sometimes, in the evening, I sit beneath it with a cup of coffee, the window cracked open, music playing low. It's my favorite part of the day. The stillness. The knowing. My phone sits on the desk beside me. Full of missed calls. Some from my mother. A few from distant relatives who never reached out unless there was drama. Even 1 or 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, but somehow I already knew who they were. I don't block them anymore. I just don't answer. Because what would I say? That I'm okay now? That I'm happy? That I found love and friendship and peace, not because of them, but in spite of them? I don't owe them that story. I lived it. That's enough.